You are standing beneath a sky the color of burnt apricot. It's late afternoon in Thebes, capital of the mighty new kingdom of Egypt, and the heat is finally beginning to loosen its grip on the sandstone. The breeze smells faintly of crushed lotus and simmering dates, and somewhere nearby, a servant is singing to a donkey that absolutely doesn't want to be sung to. Your sandals crunch softly on the path, leading toward a villa. No, not a palace, but close. This is the estate of a royal woman with far more perfumes than enemies, and far more cats than either. You're here, not to disrupt the order of things, but merely to drift through them like incense smoke, gently, and without knocking over the alabaster jars. You probably won't make it through this day. Before we begin, we invite you to like this sleepy little corner of the historical internet. If you enjoy history whispered through a curtain of dust and sun-warmed irony, consider subscribing. Comment your location and the time right now. We love knowing what part of the world you're dozing off in. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You walk through a gate carved with eyes of Horus. Flanked by potted papyrus plants someone has definitely forgotten to water. The house is not grand in the way temples are grand, but it carries that serene, soft-spoken wealth, the kind that doesn't shout but merely whispers. Yes, that is a gold-inlaid mirror. And yes, it is for the cat. The woman who lives here is called Nebetah. She is a minor daughter of a major pharaoh, which means she is wealthy enough to never work and unimportant enough to be left alone. A perfect combination, really. And Nebetah, unlike her more ambitious siblings, has devoted her life not to war or worship or even weaving, but to scents. She collects oils the way others collect lovers or gossip. Major historical fact. Ancient Egyptians were some of the earliest perfumers in human history, blending myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, and lotus into aromatic oils they use for everything, from ceremonies to mosquito repellent. Obscure tidbit? Nebetah owns a tiny cedarwood chest labeled for Batet only. Inside, a selection of feline perfumes. One smells of melted honey and wet reeds. Another might be just fish oil, but in a very fancy bottle. You stroll past a row of low stone columns, wrapped in linen, to keep the sun from cracking them. A cat slinks between them, tail high, like it owns the architecture, and technically it might. The creature stops to blink at you, not suspiciously. Just that slow, judgmental blink cats are famous for. Inside, the house is cooler. Shaded halls, walls painted in blues and ochres. Servants pad softly. Too polite to say anything out loud, but clearly wondering why you're standing in the middle of the corridor like you've forgotten what doors are for. There's laughter in the distance, Nebetah's voice, trailing behind a new perfume demonstration. Her pet cat, Mayat, wears a collar of turquoise beads and has its own painted scribe to record which scent it reacts favorably to. No one dares suggest this is excessive. Not out loud. Scholars still debate whether cats were truly considered sacred in every household, or whether they were simply very good at acting like they were. In the courtyard, a small fountain gurgles lazily, trickling water over lotus petals and a clay sculpture of Hathor playing the sistrum. Bees hover, undecided. The afternoon is beginning to fold into twilight. You find a bench beneath a pomegranate tree. The air tastes of crushed herbs and ambition deferred. You lean back and listen to the faint clinking of glass bottles being arranged for Mayat's approval. Somewhere a harp begins to play, not skillfully, but earnestly. And then, just as your eyelids start to lower, a voice nearby says, "She's asked for cinnamon oil again. Third time this week. Either the cat's in love or Nebetah is." You don't laugh, but something in your stomach does a slow, sleepy somersault. The sky is bruising into a velvety purple now, and Thebes hums with a low, gentle clatter of a city preparing to do nothing. It's a glorious tradition. You follow the sound of quiet clinking down the hall, and there it is, the perfumery room. Technically, it's just a side chamber with good ventilation and a lot of shelves. But here, jars of precious oils sit like little gods in a shrine. Frankincense, cedar, cardamom, cinnamon, iris root, and something labeled simply desert wind experimental. There are mortars and pestles, tiny bronze strainers, and shallow dishes for sun-thickening mixtures. One servant is gently warming a concoction over a flame that seems almost embarrassed to be working this late. You breathe in. It's like someone bottled late summer. Nebetah is here, wrapped in a linen robe dyed with saffron, a shade reserved for people who don't need to remind you who they are. She's seated beside Myatt, who lounges on a pillow that may have cost more than the average bricklayer earns in 5 years. Try this one. Nebetah murmurs to the cat. A servant carefully uncorks a bottle and waves the scent near Myatt's twitching nose. The cat closes its eyes, turns away. Rejected. The bottle is quietly removed from the running. You settle near a column, watching the slow-motion beauty contest unfold. Tonight's winner, apparently, is a thick oil made of myrrh, blue lotus, and some mysterious resin that smells like midnight on the Nile. Nebetah leans closer to Myatt. You like it? Do you, darling? Myatt sneezes, then begins to purr, which in this house counts as a royal decree. Major historical fact. Blue lotus was often used in ancient Egyptian perfumes not just for its dreamy scent, but because it had mild narcotic effects. Essentially, their perfume could gently sedate you. You are, in this moment, deeply unsurprised. Obscure tidbit. Wealthy Egyptians didn't just wear perfume on their skin. They also soaked scented wax cones and wore them on their heads at parties, letting them melt slowly in the heat to release fragrance. Nothing says, "I'm rich," quite like recreational scalp melting. Nebetah gestures to one of the shelves. That's the Kifi rack. She says to no one in particular. You realize she's speaking to you. It's for sacred blends. The priests burn them at night for the gods, but I've borrowed a few for personal research. A pause, mostly for the cat. You nod solemnly, as if this makes sense. It does, in a dream logic sort of way. Historians still debate whether Kifi was used more for religious ceremonies or home relaxation. I use it for both. That's efficiency. She waves her hand, and the servant lights a little brazier with a pinch of Kifi powder. The scent rises, sweet, spicy, smoky, and ancient. It wraps itself around you like a story told too many times to remember how it started. You think about the average Egyptian's day. Waking up to the sound of ibis birds arguing, applying eyeliner with a stick probably used by 3 generations, praying to a god with a head of something disturbingly toothy, then walking by a house where someone is curating a perfume shelf for their cat. Balance. Nebetah tilts her head. Do you think she remembers the lotus blend from last week? You're not sure who she means. Myatt? Herself? You? But you nod anyway. Everyone nods around Nebetah. It's easier that way. Outside, the stars have started to show their teeth. Thebes is quiet now, except for the occasional sound of ox carts rattling home and one lonely flute playing something that may or may not be ode to goat. You lean against the cool stone and exhale slowly. The Kifi is working. The cat is pleased. The city sleeps. And you? You're drifting, warm, perfumed, and more than a little enchanted by a royal daughter with too much time and just enough whimsy. But there's still more to see. The temple nearby has its own scent rituals. There are market stalls with thieves, and thieves with market stalls. A priest of Thoth who's developing the first perfume for owls. You heard that wrong. Probably. Either way, this story is far from over. And besides, Myatt hasn't even received her birthday offering yet. You wake, or rather, shift from a drifting, sandal-soft doze as the temple bells toll far in the distance. 3 low chimes carried on the cooling air. That means dinner for the gods. Or the priests. Possibly both. Nebetah has risen, the train of her saffron robe whispering against the floor as she moves toward a carved cedar box. She opens it like one might open a memory, slowly, reverently, with the sense that a cough in the wrong place might offend several gods and at least one ancestor. Inside the box, a delicate perfume cone, topped with an ornamental feather. Not for herself. For Myatt. She wears this when we go to the temple. Nebetah says, not looking at you, but clearly aware you're still here, still watching, still too enchanted or too sleepy to leave. The scent cone is placed gently atop the cat's head, where it begins to melt with imperial dignity. Myatt does not object. Of course not. She is sacred, or she believes she is. Functionally, it's the same. You follow the small procession as they begin their walk toward the Temple of Mut. It's close, but the journey is ceremonial. Slow. weighted with sandalwood and significance. Major historical fact. The Temple of Mut, dedicated to the lion-headed goddess and consort Monius, was a key part of Theban religious life, especially for women of noble rank who saw Mut as a protector and maternal force. Obscure tidbit. Some temples employed cat priests, not in the metaphorical sense, but literal caretakers whose job was to tend to feline companions considered manifestations of the goddess Bodhet. The ancient job listing would probably read, must be patient, quiet, and comfortable with being ignored. You walk behind Nebetah, flanked by 2 servants holding oil lamps shaped like lotus blossoms. The street is lit in patches. Flickers of yellow across mud brick walls. Hints of shadow where cats dart between rooftops. Somewhere, a man sneezes loudly. A dog barks once, then remembers it's not allowed in this part of town. The temple rises before you like a sandstone dream. Columns carved with stories you don't quite remember learning. Scribes would spend decades engraving these, one symbol at a time, documenting myths, victories, sacrifices, and probably the occasional typo that no one dared correct. As you step inside, the air grows cooler, heavier with old incense and quiet echo. There's a rhythm here, chanting footfalls, the gentle flick of palm fans, and above it all, the distant purr of a cat on her way to receive divine flattery. Nebetah places Mut on a low altar in a side chapel reserved for personal devotions. A bowl of milk appears as if summoned. A priest offers a scattering of petals. This is not standard practice. But nothing about this evening is. Historians still debate whether this kind of ritual was common, murmurs a passing scholar priest, or whether Lady Nebetah simply does what she likes. You want to ask what perfume Mut is wearing tonight. It smells of jasmine, honey, and the kind of expensive that requires a family tree. But instead, you sit quietly in a corner niche, half listening to the priest droning him, half lulled by the flickering lamplight. A beetle clicks across the floor. The temple cat, Mut's rival, possibly, stares at it with the full judgment of centuries. The night is full now, full of scent and dust and sleepy reverence. You hear Nebetah whisper a blessing, not in the formal temple tongue, but in the soft, domestic tone used for cats and secrets. As you close your eyes, you feel the stone beneath you holding centuries of footsteps. Pilgrims, priests, pranksters. And now stillness settles. Scent lingers. And the gods, if they're listening, are probably smiling. Just a little. Morning arrives slowly, like it isn't entirely convinced it wants to show up. The sky is a dusty apricot again, as if the sun has recycled yesterday's palette and hopes no one will notice. You stir to life in Nebetah's guest chamber, surrounded by sheer linen curtains and the faint aroma of leftover incense. A servant offers you water scented with mint. You drink, half thankful, half confused why your own morning routine does involve fragrant hydration delivered in a lapis-inlaid cup. Nebetah is already awake, of course. She has a project. You follow her to back garden, where palm trees shade long tables covered in rolled papyri, herbs half-labeled jars, and one mildly suspicious turtle. We're developing a fragrance for calming hippos, she explains. Not for public use. Just preventative. Major historical fact. Hippos were a genuine threat in ancient Egypt. Despite being sacred in some contexts, they were also known to destroy crops, upend boats, and occasionally bite priests, an unflattering hobby. Obscure tidbit. The goddess Tauret, who protected childbirth, was depicted as a pregnant hippopotamus. She was beloved, but if you squint at the statues, her smile says, "I will protect your baby, but I will end you if you test me." Nebetah dabs something amber-colored onto a strip of linen and waves it toward a clay figure of a hippo. It's unclear whether she's testing scent reaction or just creating elaborate performance art. Mut watches from a windowsill, tail flicking in mild disapproval. This one has blue lotus, fenugreek, and dry pomegranate peel, she says. It's soothing, but possibly also makes you hungry. We'll adjust. You nod solemnly. You become very good at solemn nodding. The sun climbs higher, glinting off perfume jars like they're tiny lighthouses for bees. One servant brings a tray of honey cakes and figs. Another nervously drops a vial and is met with Nebetah's gracious shrug. Accidents happen, she says. Besides, that one smelled like goat. You eat slowly. Everything tastes like it was picked by someone who knew the plant by name. Historians still debate whether elite women like me, Nebetah says between bites, had this much time on their hands. But I've decided it's historically accurate for me. The turtle finally moves. Everyone applauds politely. It's unclear if that's part of the test. Later, you follow Nebetah to a tiny storeroom where scents too volatile, too strange, or too scandalous are kept. These are experiments, she says, sliding open a stone panel. Inside, mysterious jars labeled with symbols that translate to things like caution, nightmares, only if desperate, and smells like sadness do not mix with sandalwood. You don't stay long. By midday, the air thickens with sun. Servants retreat indoors. Cats lie upside down in doorways, and Thebes folds itself into a siesta. You lie beneath a pergola draped in grapevines. Nebetah reads from a scroll of poetry, something about longing or possibly fruit. The scribe nearby takes notes every time Mayat sneezes. A breeze returns, carrying with it a scent from the temple incense still lingering across the rooftops. And for a moment, time forgets itself. You are not here to study or analyze. You're just a guest in a fragrant little corner of history. A perfume bottle tips over in the distance. A cat yawns like a queen. You close your eyes, and the day exhales with you. You awaken to the sound of laughter, light, quick, echoing faintly through the courtyard like birds flitting across a water basin. It's late afternoon again, and Thebes has resumed its quiet hustle, a city politely pretending not to be ancient. Nebetah is seated on a shaded veranda with two other noble women, all draped in linen, so sheer it seems they're dressed in afternoon shadows. Their conversation is not urgent. There's nothing urgent about complaining over spiced beer and cucumber slices. You take your seat beside the column where a cat nap was clearly just concluded. There's still warmth on the stone. Today's subject of discourse: weddings. Not anyone's in particular, just a general absurdity of ceremonial pairings, dowries, and the nerve of a man who thinks one jar of honey is an adequate bride price for a woman who owns 12 perfumes. Major historical fact. In ancient Egypt, marriage was a private contract between families rather than a religious sacrament. Couples often began living together after informal agreements, and a legalese came later, if at all. Divorce? Totally allowed. Obscure tidbit. Bridal perfumes were custom blended in noble households, tailored not just to the bride's preferences, but sometimes even to the groom's nose. A form of marital diplomacy, with a high risk of sandalwood overload. Nebetah is describing the worst wedding she ever attended. The groom cried, not with joy, just sobbed, all the way through the dowry procession. His father kept saying, he's overwhelmed by love. He was not. He was overwhelmed by his second wife watching from the papyrus bushes. The women laugh. You can't help it. You do too. It echoes against the columns, briefly scandalizing an ibis that was not expecting to be part of this conversation. You're offered a dish of dates. You bite one. It's stuffed with crushed almonds and dusted with something floral. Probably rose. Possibly magic. Historians still debate whether these social gatherings were purely recreational, one of the women says, reaching for a fig, or low-stakes diplomacy in disguise. I say both, Nebetah replies. Recreation is diplomacy when you have enough cousins. Mayat pads into view, resplendent in a new collar made of shell beads and faintly smelling of neroli. She hops into Nebetah's lap with the entitlement of a god, auditioning for a slightly more central temple. She likes you, one of the women says to you. She tolerates me, Nebetah corrects. And in this house, that's affection. As the sun begins to lean westward, a young musician arrives with a harp and plays a melody that sounds like someone trying not to wake the Nile. It's tender, almost tentative, as if the music knows your brain is turning to sand again. You lie back against the cool plaster wall, head tilted, half listening as the women return to a heated debate about whether the scent of roasted sesame should ever be worn as perfume. The verdict, no, unless you're trying to woo a falconer. A servant refills your cup with something sweet and herbal. You sip, you drift, you don't resist. The sky above turns dusky lavender. Cats gather on the terrace walls like sleepy statues. And just as you start to float towards sleep again, someone says, "Tomorrow we go to the market. Might needs new oils." Naturally, Section 6. You rise earlier than usual, partly because Nebetah said we leave at dawn, and partly because a rooster 2 rooftops over is conducting an extremely personal vendetta against silence. The city is still waking. Fishermen trudge past with baskets sloshing softly. A donkey brays at nothing in particular, offended perhaps by its own existence. You, Nebetah, Ma'at in a basket, and a very patient servant named Tepi set off toward the central market. The roads are dusted with yesterday's footsteps. Everything smells faintly of bread, old sweat, and optimism. Major historical fact. Ancient Egyptian markets were noisy, bustling, deeply social centers. You could buy everything from onions and wigs to spells and legal advice, all while hearing about someone's cousin's cousin who once saw a crocodile eat a chariot. Obscure tidbit. Some perfume vendors swore their oils were chanted over by temple priests, as if fragrance could absorb divine approval. It's unclear if this made them smell better, but it definitely made them cost more. The market opened before you like a fan. Stalls of spices, cloths, and hues loud enough to wake the gods, donkeys with opinions, and merchants shouting in the practiced tone of people who think you need a 3rd bronze mirror. Nebetah heads straight for her favorite scent vendor, a man with 7 fingers and no known last name. His stall smells like everything at once: cinnamon, lemon balm, melted beeswax, a hint of possible fraud. He bows theatrically. Lady Nebetah and Ma'at, radiant as ever. Ma'at blinks once, cool as a papyrus scroll. Nebetah sniffs a clay jar and frowns. Too citrus. She'll think I've taken up cleaning. You sample a tiny dab of oil labeled Nile Mist. It smells blue, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't, but your brain accepts it. The vendor hands over a tiny flask. Try this one. Frankincense and tamarind, for feline moods of mystery. Ma'at sniffs, licks her paw, a tentative purr. A wind, a goat wanders by. No one seems to own it. It pauses to smell your tunic, decides you are uninteresting, and walks away. Historians still debate whether animals roam these markets freely, Tepi says, returning from a side stall with 2 figs and a sharp look. But we have all agreed to stop chasing them. You browse fabric dyed with indigo and crushed beetle shell. You sidestep a child trying to sell you a lucky fish scale. You pause before a pottery stand, where someone is selling miniature cat statues shaped like perfume bottles. Nebetah purchases one. "It's tasteful," she says. It is not. The sun begins to press down with its full weight. So you retreat with a group to a shaded cafe where laborers drink beer and shout across tables with loving irritation. You sit. You drink something cold and mildly suspicious. You watch the market swirl. 2 merchants are in a theatrical argument about whether rose water should be mixed with date sap. A 3rd joins in with a loud, "It depends on the cat." Everyone agrees. No one explains. Ma'at stretches in her basket, now faintly glistening with her new tamarind frankincense blend. She looks smug, and somewhere between a second fig and a laugh you don't remember starting, you realize you've started to smell like this city, like sweat and lotus and low-stakes mischief. You don't mind. You lean back in the shade, let your breath go long and slow, and tell your mind it can stop working for a while. The market continues, with or without you, and Ma'at has at least 4 new opinions.